Shalom, and welcome to our History Podcast. This is a production of KingdomPreppers.org. I'm your host, Kingdom Prepper, and you're listening to Churchianity, 2,000 Years of Leaven. We continue with our history. Part 12, Justinian and Theodora. In the Eastern Roman Empire, which would later be called Byzantium, a strange thing began to happen during the reign of Emperor Anastasius. The love of gladiatorial combat, which was long a favored Roman sport, eventually declined, being replaced by chariot racing. Much like today, and all of this has a modern equivalent, chariot racing permeated medieval Eastern Roman society, particularly in the larger cities. Like the modern abominations of stock car racing or soccer or American football, chariot racing dominated the entertainment scene for Eastern Roman sports fans. It was part of daily life and figured largely in the lives of non-fans as well. Put another way, everyone living in Constantinople could name the star chariot drivers, and almost everyone knew the winning racing teams from a given chariot race. The teams, however, were not defined by drivers and their horses. In fact, the origin of modern sports sponsorship has its foundation in the Eastern Roman Empire, as chariot racing teams were backed by various associations and companies who sponsored each race. But the symbols these sponsors used in their branding was a simple color, in this case red, white, blue, or green. Therefore, spectators were not fans of individual chariot drivers, but the color under which pairs of drivers and their horses would race, and these fans would be associated with those colors themselves. Therefore, fans who cheered for a particular color would be labeled the Reds or the Greens, etc. What is more, these color-coded fans despised one another.
By the time Anastasius died of old age in 518,
writes Susan Wise Bauer in her book, The History of the Medieval World,
the fans had settled into two opposed factions, the Blues, who had absorbed the Reds, and the Greens, who now encompassed the Whites. They were increasingly violent, always ready to seize any excuse to murder fans in the other faction. In fact, 3,000 Blues had been killed at Constantinople in a 501 riot over chariot race results, and other riots in 507 and 515 had been almost as bloody. Anastasius left no son, although he had nephews who were anxious to claim the right to rule. In their place, though, the imperial bodyguard elected its own commander, the 70-year-old career army officer Justin, as the new emperor. Justin was shrewd, experienced, and had the support of the Blues. He also had the firm support of his nephew Justinian, a soldier who was in his 30s. In 521, Justin made his nephew consul, the highest official position in Constantinople below that of emperor, and Justinian began to take a greater and greater part in the government of the empire.
By the year 527, Justinian, an avid member of the Blues himself, would be emperor of the East. A few years earlier, he had fallen in love with a forbidden woman named Theodora.
Theodora's life is chronicled by Procopius, the Roman historian who gives such a sober and trustworthy chronology of Byzantium's military history in his History of the Wars.
Writes Susan Wise Bauer.
Procopius was a man's man. He admired strength and force, he scorned uncertainty and compromise, and he believed that a real emperor should be free of female influence. His joint biography of Justinian and Theodora, The Secret History, was written after Justinian married his actress, and after it became clear that Justinian, brilliant and mercurial, depended on his wife. It drips with vitriol. Despite the acidic tone, there is little reason to think that Procopius got his basic facts wrong. Theodora's past was well known to her contemporaries. Her father had been a bear trainer who worked in the half-time shows given by the Greens between chariot races.
As a side note, here we have another ancient reference that has a modern shade, the infamous halftime show. As we have hinted in other materials, modern sports, all of them, are based on ancient pagan practices. And as Torah-observant believers, we are commanded to not do as the heathen nations concerning these matters. At any rate, Citing Procopius, Susan Wise Bauer goes on to say that Theodora's father took ill and died,
leaving his wife with 3 small girls under the age of 7. The Greens had hired another trainer, and in order to survive, the mother had forced the girls to appear before the Blues as entertainers. Entertainment led to prostitution,
and a life of ill repute. Being both fatherless and absent the protection of brothers, Theodora, like other Roman women doomed to such a life, went down this infamous path and eventually found her way to Alexandria, which was still a Christian center at the time, though a controversial one. Alexandria was the haven for Christians who found themselves on the opposing side of the current theological debate that surrounded yet another position viewed as heretical. This time a belief of the Nestorians, who held that the Messiah had 2 separate and distinct natures, human and divine. Of this, Susan Wise Bauer writes,
"The priests at the Council of Chalcedon thought of themselves as monophysitic, and they had carefully rejected language that might make it sound as though Christians worshipped more than one divinity."
The Chalcedonian Creed proposed that the Messiah was one with the Father, that they existed as one being with one subsistence, but that he himself had 2 natures, and those natures were not divided.
To listen to the full audio of this podcast, or to download a free MP3 version, visit our website, kingdompreppers.org, by clicking the link in the description, and journey with us on this important historic odyssey.